There's been a lot that's been covered already in Isaiah. But it says, "Moreover, the Lord said unto me, Take thee a great roll." So this is a big piece of paper. "And write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher-shalal-hash-baz." Now, right there, what you're seeing is the longest name in the Bible. I don't know if you knew that or not, but there it is. It only happens twice, in verse 3 and also verse 1. Now, way back when I was a brand new married person, you can see on this app here, I've actually changed my image to a picture that I took just the other day of my wife and me. And my wife and I are now 19 years married. But so when our first year we were married, we had this little fish, and we figured we were going to have a pet. And where we were in the apartments at the time, you couldn't have a cat, you couldn't have a dog, but they didn't say anything about fish. So we bought a fish, and we named it the longest name in the Bible, Maher-shalal-hash-baz. I don't know why, it's just that we came up with that and we did it. So that's what this chapter reminds me of, is 19 years ago when I was married to my wife, and it was a great experience. Anyways, here's what it is. And the name kind of means like a flood is going to come quickly. So there's several different names that come together with that one. But Maher-shalal-hash-baz, it's hasty, right? It's swift. And if you continue looking, you're going to see that there's like good and bad senses. It's liquid that flows easily. So it's going to be like a storm that comes quickly, to my understanding, of course. If you find that's a different name, then I stand corrected. But that's what I get at this point. So the Lord said, hey, there's going to be a storm that comes quickly. Okay, name your son that. And you remember, God is kind of in the business of naming the child that way in some senses, because remember Hosea, he was told to have children and to name his sons specifically certain names. And the reason why is because we know that those sons and the names of those sons represented God's people at the certain time. And of course, we can relay our own experience in the past and present and future to kind of fit into that scenario as well. Anyways, this is what's happening with his son here, Isaiah's son. Name him Maher-shalal-hash-baz, because what's going to come is quick, and it's going to be like a fierce, what I think is a storm or some kind of flood. So I took unto me faithful witnesses to record. Okay, this is Isaiah. He's now got some people that he can trust. Uriah the priest. Okay, not all priests you can trust, but this one I guess he could trust. So praise the Lord for that. And Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. It's actually Jereberechiah right here, but Jeberechiah. But you can see that Zechariah, in his book, he's named just that part without the J-E at the beginning. And so Isaiah is contemporary with Zechariah. We know also, as we talked about before, he's also contemporary with Hosea and a couple of other prophets during the time. But so after he took witnesses to record that he was going to do this, naming his child, he went unto the prophetess, which is his wife. His wife, by the way, is called a prophetess because she's a female married to the prophet. And whether she was, having dreams and visions and writing those things like Isaiah, I'm not sure, because we don't really know much about her except at this point. Well, and also, of course, she was pregnant. She conceived and bare a son. And then said the Lord unto me, Call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And the reason being is I think the Lord has a plan for his people, and the son is going to be a living witness along with these faithful people, Uriah and Zechariah, to witness that God is doing something right before their eyes. Notice it says, though, in verse 4 of Isaiah chapter 8, in fact, I'm going to do something right here real quick. I'm going to make a customization. I'm going to go to, there we go. Okay, so that's going to be a better look at right there. So the yellow is kind of hard to see. It says, so before the child shall have knowledge to cry, before the child knows how to say, my father and my mother. So before the child knows how to speak, so like 1.5-ish, 2 years, somewhere around there, before they can say, my father, my mother, what's going to happen? The riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Assyria. So The king of Assyria is coming. Damascus and Samaria will be destroyed. Their spoil, their riches are going to be gone. And it's going to happen before this child that is in the womb of the mother, before this child comes forth and can say, my father and my mother. These things are going to happen, okay? So the Lord spake unto me again. In other words, this child is kind of a living prophecy. So I bet you everybody around that time was looking at this child, like wondering, when is it going to speak? You know, they're paying attention, like every time you see Isaiah, like, so, hey, Isaiah, how you doing? Has the child been saying anything recently? You know, and it says, no, not yet quite. It's just 9 months old, but pretty soon the child's going to be speaking. And people are like, whoa, you know, they're knowing and understanding that something's going to happen before that child can say, my father and my mother. So we have a living witness here, a living prophecy. So it says in verse 5, the Lord spake also again, saying, for as much as this people refuses the waters of Shiloh that go softly. So there's waters that are going softly, right? They don't want those waters. They don't want waters that go softly. So what's going to happen? There's going to be a quick rushing water, Meher Shalal Hashbaz. So for as much as this people, they refuse the waters that go softly, and they rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son. Now, if you don't recall what this is about, you can go back to, I think it's chapter 7, verse 1. I'm going to go there, Isaiah 7. And it's around here. We have, in the day of Ahaz, that Rezin, okay, the king of Syria, and the son of Remaliah. So Rezin is what we just read about in Isaiah chapter 8, and Remaliah's son, so the son of Remaliah. Let's see it again. We have, you guys don't like the waters that flow softly, but you rejoice in something. You rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Now, what are we talking about? Don't forget, friends, this is serious business right here. This is talking about Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. Now, remember what they did. They went up together toward Jerusalem to war against it. They wouldn't prevail, but remember, when they was told that Syria and Ephraim, which is, Rezin and Remaliah's son, Syria and Ephraim have come together, and David's heart was moved, and the heart of this people. And so it's talking about this whole idea in chapter 7 of Rezin and Syria, and the son of Remaliah, which is Ephraim, coming together. And it says, they together have taken evil counsel against you, which is Judah and Jerusalem. They're going to vex it, but it's not going to happen, right? So God is basically proclaiming this destruction against Syria and against Remaliah's son, which is Ephraim. And the whole problem is that these children of God that are Ephraim, they're supposed to be God's children, right? They have, in their apostasy, they have united together in what I called last time ecumenism. They have come together in an ecumenical sense to war against God's people, which is, Judah in Jerusalem, or Jerusalem in Judah. And so you can't do that. You can't destroy God's actual place where his name is. Now, all of Israel was supposed to be where his name was, but remember, we've got some of his people, Ephraim, this specifically in this chapter 7 and 8, they have turned away from God, and they're going with Syria to destroy Jerusalem in Judah. But so God won't let that happen. And so here in chapter 8, there's this prophecy that's being told, and it's your son. Call him Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And what's going to happen is, before he can say certain words, there's going to be destruction against this whole thing. And so what happens is, we have this whole scenario of this Rezin and Remaliah's son, which is Syria and Ephraim. They're coming together, and the reason why it's a big deal is because God's people, his people, refuse the waters of Shiloh that go softly. And that's what God wants to do, is lead his sheep to the waters that go softly, because they won't go and they won't drink where there's fast waters. Okay, Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And so what you have is, they rejoice instead of the slow waters. They rejoice in this unity between God's people and not God's people. Now therefore, behold, the Lord brings upon them the waters of the river. And it says, Strong and many are those waters. Now, why the waters? Remember the name Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And so the waters of the river are going to be strong and many. Even the king of Assyria. That's who the waters will be, strong and many. The waters represent the king of Assyria and all his glory. Now remember, we already talked about Assyria coming. I think it was in chapter 7 as well. And so Assyria is going to come to destroy God's people. The reason why is because God's people in this Ephraim group have actually turned away from God's will to unite with Syria, a pagan nation, and they're going to war against God's people, specifically Judah, where Jerusalem is, where God has placed his name. Right? So like all of this is symbolic. Of course, today we don't have Judah and Jerusalem. We don't have Jerusalem where God's name is there. And all of that back in the day, like in Isaiah's day, that was all physical. Now it's spiritual. We can understand it in a different sense. And so what we have here is, have God's people turned away from God? Have they joined others? Are they an ecumenical movement? Are they pulling together in the wrong ways to then war against those who actually believe God's truth, where his name actually is? The answer is yes, absolutely. You can see in 1,000 different ways. And so what's happening is Assyria is coming. Okay, Assyria, we can say it today like Assyria is what we can say at the end of time, kind of like Babylon. Babylon's coming, right? And so what's happening is they don't like the soft waters. So there's going to be waters that are rapid, okay? Waters that are strong, waters of the river, strong and many. It'll be the king of Assyria in all his glory. He shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. By the way, if you like studying Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, when I read this section right here, it reminded me of verse 40 of Daniel chapter 11. So just a clue, you can go ahead and use that little section right there and look at the other verse and see how it does compare. He shall go through Judah, he shall pass through Judah, and he shall overflow and go over and shall reach even to the neck. In other words, the water is going to be high. What water? The water that's going to be of the river that's going to be strong and many. That water is going to be high, even unto the neck. And it's going to be stretching out his wings, and he'll fill the breadth of the land, O Emmanuel. Now, I don't fully understand why he brings up Emmanuel here, except I do have an idea. So if you guys have better ideas, then please let me know, because I'm telling you, Isaiah has huge thoughts. So remember, when we're looking at Isaiah chapter 7, and we're reading in the first few verses that Syria and Ephraim are coming together to war against Judah and Jerusalem inside Judah. And so you have this whole plan of attack against God's people. But God is saying, no, you're not going to destroy Judah, because out of Judah will come a son that will be brought forth from a virgin. Judah's not going anywhere. Jerusalem's not going anywhere. It's like, all you guys, remember he said, you've got 65 years for Ephraim, and that's it. And so we can see that God's place, God's name, where he placed his name, it's under attack because God has plans that the enemy's trying to uproot and destroy. But you can't do that to God. God has the more abilities than the enemy does. So no matter what it is that the enemy's trying to do to you in your life, if you are God's, you've surrendered your mind to him, and that is his throne in your life, then nothing, not a single thing is going to overtake you or overcome you. Sure, you might be harmed, you might be besieged, you might be, set into a different place, whatever, but you're not going anywhere because you're God's. And so if God has placed his name in your life, you can trust that he's going to take care of you. That's kind of what's happening here with Jerusalem inside Judah. No. Ephraim and Syria, they're going to try this. It's going to be ugly, but it's not going to go anywhere. In fact, I'm going to send Assyria against them, and they're going to completely wipe them out. Water's going to be up to the neck. And so that's what's happening here. And so it seems to me that when he said that in Isaiah 7 about all those plans that Ephraim and Syria has, he then said there's going to be a virgin, and it's going to bring forth this virgin's going to bring forth a son. You're going to call his name Emmanuel. And so when he brings up this same idea of this coming together, which in chapter 8 here is called a confederacy, I call it today ecumenism. When you have this idea of this ecumenical movement coming together, and there's a plan to destroy God's people or where his name is, God brings up this idea, O Emmanuel. In other words, don't forget my name, my plan is there. So like, yeah, bring Ephraim, bring Syria together, plan all you want to against my people, against where I've placed my name. It's not going to work, right? So that's what I think is happening here in this idea. He shall pass through Judah, that's where Jerusalem is. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck. In other words, it's like people are going to almost drowned in this situation. But the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of the land. Oh, Emmanuel, don't forget that I've got a plan, like in chapter 7, right? That's what I think is being said. Now, here's this idea of ecumenism. Associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces. In other words, go ahead, gather together. Make an association. What is this called? To properly spoil, to break in pieces, figuratively, to be good for nothing, bad. You know what? I did that last time. Remember, I actually brought this up, and it was the same kind of thing. So it's to break stuff, to hurt, to do harm, to do mischief, to punish, to be wicked, to do worse, etc. It's not coming together. But there is a phrase that's going to be referred to right here in verse 12, confederacy. Associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Give ear, and all ye of far countries, gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and you shall be broken in pieces. In other words, he's saying it twice for emphasis. Go ahead, do it. It's not going to work. Go ahead, do it. It's not going to work. And then he says in verse 10, take counsel together. So this counsel together is this confederacy. And that's why I keep messing up this word associate, because it seems to me like these words all go together. But obviously they don't. Now with this Hebrew, as I had just pulled up earlier, take counsel together and it shall come to naught. So it's basically the same thing he just said right here, right? He said it twice there. Gird yourselves, it'll be broken. Gird yourselves, it'll be broken. Counsel together, it won't work. It'll come to naught. Speak the word and it shall not stand. Why? Because God is with us. Remember, O Emmanuel, God with us. That's kind of the same idea, right? And so what you have here is you guys can say everything you want to do against God's people. You can do everything you want against God's people. You can gather yourselves together. You can take counsel. It'll come to naught. You can speak words, but they won't stand. Why? Because God is with us. We have Emmanuel. That's what's being said here. If we have the Son of God, which Emmanuel is, God with us, God was manifest in the flesh. That's God the Father being manifest in the flesh of his Son. That's why, for example, in John 14, verse 9, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Because he said earlier, no man has seen the Father. Nobody. John chapter 5, verse 37 through 39. No man has seen the Father. You've never seen his shape. You don't know what he looks like. But if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Well, why? Because God the Father was manifest in the flesh of his Son. And so that's how God is with us here in this description. And so we have in verse 11, the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand. So God was speaking to Isaiah. He spoke with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, say not, don't you say a confederacy. So this confederacy is an alliance, a conspiracy, a treason together, coming together for destroying God's people, right? And it's part of God's people that are connecting with Syria, which is an apostate group. So we have this whole ecumenical movement here that the Lord is saying it's not going to work. It's not going to stand. All these verses right here are basically saying it's not going to happen. And then he spoke strongly to Isaiah and instructed Isaiah that he should not walk in the ways of this people. Do not say a confederacy to them whom this people shall say a confederacy. In other words, don't agree with them. Even if they say it, if Ephraim is saying, yeah, let's confederate together, let's be confederates together with Syria, saying, no, don't say it. Neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Why? Because you are to sanctify the Lord of hosts himself. Your God in heaven is your God. It doesn't matter what Ephraim is coming together with Syria about and wanting to make a plan about their God and trying to blend gods together. That doesn't work. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself and let him be your fear. let him be your dread. That's the whole thing here, right? Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself. Kind of reminds me in John chapter 17, John 17, verse 17 through 19. Jesus said, sanctify them through thy truth. The word, thy word is truth. Remember, Jesus is praying, and Jesus had said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, why? The way for what? He finishes by saying, no man comes unto the Father but by me. So the reason why Jesus is the way is because he brings us to the Father. The truth brings us to the Father. The life, it's the life of the Father in him. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. Now, who is the truth? It's Christ who is the truth. We can see that in John chapter 1. And it's because, of course, the Father sent him and gave him words to speak. Jesus himself said, I don't even speak my own words. My Father, he's given me the words to speak. So thy word, Jesus Christ, living and manifesting the Father, is truth. And thou hast sent me into the world. That's why I'm the truth to be sent. Even so have I also sent them into the world. So this sanctification thing, notice this. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through the truth. That's what Jesus is saying in prayer, and that's what that verse reminds me of. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, let him be your dread. Christ in you, the hope of glory, right? That's the whole concept here. Verse 14. He shall be for a sanctuary, that's the Lord, but for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense. To who? To the heathen? Is that what he's going to be a rock of offense to? Notice, to both the houses of Israel, for a gin, which is a snare, and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Whoa, wait a minute. So like all these people here that are saying, associate yourselves, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, he said several times. Take counsel, it'll come to naught. Speak a word, it's not going to work. God is with us. Don't even go with these people. Don't listen to them. Don't say anything. If they say confederacy, don't go with them, because the Lord is going to be your fear. And then he says, he, the Lord, will be for you a sanctuary, but he's going to be a stone of stumbling, not for those that are outside of his faith, but it's going to be to the houses of Israel, and for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So God's people are the ones that are going to be stumbling over this stone or rock of offense, this stone of stumbling. And we know Jesus Christ is the stone of stumbling and the rock of offense. It's very clear in the New Testament. Christ was making that plain. And so what's happening in Isaiah is God is making it very clear to his people that you can't confederate together or make a confederacy together with those of other nations, with other faith, with other gods, with other anything, and then still claim to be God's people. Let's make a confederacy. Let's come together. Let's enjoy each other's company. No, God says that's not for me. Sanctify the Lord in your hearts. Make him be your dread. Make him be your fear. And so that's what's happening, is God is making it clear, at least to me, that these people, his people, are going to stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken. These are the people of Israel. Really? I thought Israel was supposed to be like the group that's going to endure and be safe from all the trials. No, not if they turn away from God and pick up other gods. That's not how it's going to work. So now right here in verse 16, there's a paragraph break. You can see by that little thing, by the way, if you didn't know that, that's a paragraph break in the original language. So just for kind of a little bit of an education, in the original language, they did not have verse breaks. Neither did they have punctuation. Okay, like these things right here. They didn't have periods. They didn't have commas. They just had sentences with a lot less wording, a lot less words. Like, for example, this whole thing right here, the only Hebrew word out of all this is sanctuary. See how that works? I'm highlighting over this, and it's showing that there's no words except this blue one that highlights when I go over it. So like the Hebrew is less. There is no punctuation. There are no verses, but there are paragraphs. And so this is a paragraph break here. And so God has just been saying all of what we've read about, right? Name your child Meher Shalal Hashbaz, because there's going to be destruction that comes quickly, right? It's going to be a river strong with lots of power. It's going to be Assyria. And they're going to come and destroy everything. Why? Because these people, my people, are associating themselves with those who don't even have God, the Lord, as their fear and as their dread. And the Lord is going to be your sanctuary, He's going to be your sanctuary, but He's going to completely wipe out anybody who is not on His side. And then right in the context of this, which is amazing, He says, bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples. Now the word seal, you can see, is like especially to seal, to close up. I want the law to be closed up within my disciples. Okay? You can almost read it like this. Bind up the testimony, so make sure it's tight and sealed and ready to transport, because that's what you do when you bind something like that. You weren't going to just like tie a knot for no reason. You're going to take it and keep it safe. And then make the law a seal among my disciples. That's how I think you could understand that. Make the law a seal among my disciples, but seal up the law among or within my disciples. So the seal is going to be, of course, at the end of time, we know, on the forehead of God's people. We're going to see in Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, and 14, verse 1. Right? So after these things I saw 4 angels, and they were standing on the 4 corners of the earth. They were holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. I heard another angel, and this angel was ascending from the east. He had the seal of the living God. We know the living God, according to Peter, is the Father. Jesus was called the Son of the living God, right, by Peter. So he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea. And this one angel that had the seal, he cried out to these 4 angels, and what he said was, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we, as angels, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Now, what is this seal? What are they going to have in their foreheads? I looked, and lo, a lamb stood in the Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name, there it is, written in their foreheads. So they have the seal of God, the seal of God in their foreheads, but it's the Father's name or character that is in their foreheads. And that's why obedience to the commandments is so vitally important. Because if we're going to have the Father's seal or name or character in our foreheads, we will have chosen to do what is right by the power of Christ in us. And as a result of choosing that power and the path, we will have the seal of God or the law of God sealed among His disciples. And so in this context of Isaiah chapter 8, where there's a confederacy, there's a bunch of God's people coming together with those that are not God's people, and they're wanting to have a confederacy. They're wanting to come together. They're wanting to make plans against God's people. God says, oh no, it's not going to work. Right around that time, He's saying that God is to be, the Lord of hosts is to be your fear and your dread. You're to sanctify Him. Right in the context of all this confederacy and sanctifying God in your hearts, it talks about binding the law among His disciples. I feel like this is completely the third angel's message. We don't want to worship the beast in his image because we're called to worship the Father in His image, which is the Father and His Son, right? The Son is the image of the Father, just like the image is the apostate Protestants in America are the image of the papacy. It's the same idea there with the Father in His image and the beast in His image. And so you have this whole scenario, don't worship the beast in his image, worship the Father in His image. And so why? It's because the commandments of God are going to be kept and the faith of His Son, Jesus Christ, and that leads to having the law bound or sealed among the disciples, right? And so what we have here, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples in the context of coming together as a confederacy and the Lord being the one who is your focus and your fear and your dread. Now, in the midst of all this, the house of Israel is going to stumble and be broken and be snared and fall and be taken. That's amazing. Isaiah says, I will wait upon the Lord that hides His face. That what? That hides His face. From who? from the house of Jacob. Remember now, Jacob became Israel. And so when you want to rebuke Israel, you call Israel Jacob, because now Israel has gone back to the former deceitful life compared to the victorious life that God gave him in the name Israel. So he hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for it. I will wait for the Lord. He will hide his face, but I will look for his face, right? So that's what Isaiah is saying. Why? Why are you able to say that I'm going to wait upon the Lord and look for his face when he hides his face from Jacob? It's because the testimony and the law is sealed among us. That's what's happening. We're faithful to God's commandments. We're faithful to his will, his desire. We're making him our fear and our dread. And it's in the midst of a confederacy. I will wait upon the Lord. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and for wonders. Remember this Meher Shalal Hashbaz? That's one of the children that the Lord has given unto Isaiah. And that child is for a sign and for a wonder in Israel. And now that's exactly what was being said with name your child Meher Shalal Hashbaz, is because my children are signs and wonders in Israel for the Lord of hosts, which dwells in Mount Zion. Now, ultimately, we can see that Mount Zion in Hebrews chapter 12 is up in heaven. And so that's where the Lord dwells, is in heaven. You can just ask Jesus, right? You ask Jesus. If you look up in the New Testament, the word Father and heaven, those two words, you will see almost every time it's used in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus was saying very, very pointedly, my Father is in heaven. And so what's happening here is the Father, even Isaiah knew that the Father was in heaven, from the Lord of hosts, which dwells in Mount Zion. Verse 19. And we talked about the Lord of hosts last time in chapter 6 when we were dealing with that. I do believe that is the Father doing things through his Son. So verse 19, when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter. Okay, wait a minute. When they shall say unto you, who are they? The only they in this context are those that are making a confederacy, right? It's Ephraim, which is God's people, with Syria. And what's it led them to? It's led them to seeking unto familiar spirits and to wizards that peep and mutter. Now, this idea of familiar spirits and wizards, that's spiritualism. You can do your study in the Old Testament and find familiar spirits. If you just look up that phrase, it's the idea of prattling a father's name. In other words, you're saying his name. You're invoking him from the dead. Properly a mumble, a water skin from its hollow sound, kind of like, the way the demons generally are even sounding. The reason why is because I think the enemy knows how they sound. Hence, a necromancer, a ventriloquist, as though a voice from a jar. It's translated bottle or familiar spirit. That's how it is. So it's like the way that they sound is most of how this is being referred to. So the familiar spirits, like calling up the spirits of those that you are familiar with, whether it be a dead father or mother, sister, brother, grandfather, grandmother, etc. And to wizards that peep and mutter. That peep and mutter kind of thing is kind of like the voice that is being referred to here. So this idea is seeking unto them that are spiritualists, when they shall say unto you. So they are spiritualists. By the way, in today's ecumenical movement, what it has led people to be is spiritualists. And what we need to do is make God our fear and our dread, right? And we need to sanctify him in our hearts. We need to have the testimony bound up and the law bound up amongst us as his disciples. And when they shall say unto you, because they will, when they say unto you, hey, we're spiritualists, come and follow us and worship with us. I ask a question. Should not a people that are living, shouldn't they seek unto their God instead of for the living unto the dead? In other words, sometimes this is difficult to understand. Shouldn't or should not a people seek their God? You should seek the living for the dead. Instead of what they're trying to do is seek the dead for the living. So we are to seek the living for those that are dead. Help us to understand what happened to that person that died. We're not supposed to seek the dead to learn about the living. So spiritualism is not what God wants us to be doing. We're to be seeking our God, right? To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word. The law, by the way, is the law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Pentateuch. Some people will call it the law of Moses there. And the testimony is anything that the prophets have written beyond that, the law and the testimony. So all the prophets, whether it be Solomon, whether it be the book of like Joshua or Isaiah, Malachi, etc. And of course for us the New Testament as well, the writings of Paul, all the writings of Luke. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And so what's going to be happening at the end of time when spiritualists take the major position in the world of religion? They're going to be calling up the spirits of the dead. And those spirits are going to be mimicking, they're going to be familiar spirits, mimicking those that are already passed away, whether they be grandma or the preacher that was pretty famous back in the day or whoever else, right? And so you can read about this in a really good book if you haven't read it yet. It's called The Great Controversy. And I'd have to remember what chapter it is, but it's toward the end of that book where it deals with this idea of spiritualism. I think it's called Modern Day Spiritualism. In fact, I think that's the title of it. And so what you have is these false teachers, these spirits, these wizards, anybody who's spiritualistic, what they're going to do, spiritualistic, what they're going to do is lead you or try to lead you away from God's law. And so the whole standard at the end of time, when there's miracles and when there's wonders and all these amazing things, when there's a confederacy, when there's an ecumenical movement that's scattering around the world, where they're all saying and thinking they have the same God, but it's not really the God of heaven, therefore it's not the God that you should serve. When they're all coming together with all these things, what are we to do? We're to focus on the Father and His Son through the power of the Spirit. And what we're supposed to do is, by their direction in the Word, is we're to bind up the testimony and seal the law among us. That's where our strength is. The 10 Commandments will keep us from falling, will keep us from spiritual embarrassment, will keep us from deception. And so what we have here is this whole idea of spiritualism during the time of an ecumenical movement. To the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. They shall pass through it, hardly be stead and hungry. And it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves. Now, who is going to be hungry? Those that do not worship the Father and His Son, those that do not have the law and the testimony. Those are the ones that speak not according to this word. They shall pass through it, hardly be stead and hungry. And these people, thinking they have one that they serve and honor and worship that will provide for them, it says, it will come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves. They will curse the King on the earth and their God in heaven. And they will look upward. They won't have any support. They won't have any strength. But what does it say of us later in the book of Isaiah? Your bread and your water will be sure, right? Now, I'm hoping that it'll be gluten-free bread because I'm allergic to some of that stuff. But God is going to provide for us, and He's going to do it in a way that's going to take care of us. But if we're not following His law, if we're not following His word, it will not be for our good. So really, this whole Isaiah chapter 7 and 8 scenario, where it's talking about a confederacy, but there's a promise of Jesus Christ coming. Remember, Emmanuel. We can take that whole picture and put it toward the end of time and say, there's a confederacy, but Jesus Christ is coming, right? It's kind of the same idea. It's not the first coming this time, it's the second coming. But we can take the same concepts of confederacy or ecumenism, and you can realize that this whole idea is going to play out again, just like it did in the past. And so we're almost done with this chapter. These people that do not follow the Lord, they're going to be in derision. And they shall look upon the earth and behold trouble and darkness, dimness and anguish. They shall be driven to darkness. So notice what it's saying again. They're going to pass through this time, hardly be stead and hungry. It shall come to pass, they will be, when they're hungry, they won't be fed with water and bread like it says to the faithful and later in Isaiah, but they will fret themselves. They can't help themselves. They will curse their king because, President Trump's not going to help them out. And they're going to curse their God as well. They're going to look upward. They're not going to see anything. Like, where is our God? How can we help ourselves? And our king's not going to do anything either. They're going to look to the earth. So they're going to look up and to the earth. And there's going to be trouble, darkness, dimness, anguish, and they will be driven to darkness. This is the fate of those that have a false God. We saw that happening in Isaiah chapter 2. We saw it happening in Isaiah 7 and 8. And all through Isaiah, you're going to cover the different nations, Egypt and Assyria, and just going all through these different nations. They all have a false god, and they are not going to fare well. What we must have at the end of time is an understanding so crystal clear of who it is we worship, that when somebody says, fear God and give glory to him, we will know exactly what that means. And so I appeal to every one of us to continue studying, to continue learning what it is the Bible does say about God, his Son, and the Spirit, that we can know and understand how to interact with the Father and his Son, and we can know how to be blessed and transformed by the renewing of our minds, and we can be prepared to have that seal of God, which is binding the testimony and sealing the law among his disciples. And so I want the Father's name written in my forehead. I'm hoping you do as well. So let's pray together, asking God's blessings, and then we'll take a few questions and comments at the end. Holy Father in heaven, I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to be able to know a little bit more about what you're saying here to us as a people. I pray that you would guide our minds, help us to know that in the midst of the times in which we live, it's not far different from what your people, Israel, went through many years ago before your Son came the first time. But now here we are, right before he comes again, and it seems like there's this ecumenical push all around the world, and it's affecting people all around us. I pray that you would lead and guide us, that we can know, we can be clear, we can be intelligent, and may it be that we're drawn closer to you in the midst of our own personal study, our own personal prayer, and help us to be able to witness, to share, to minister to those who do not know. We thank you for this, asking that you would guide us in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
The Bible has come to be alive always when you speak the word of God. Thank you for that.
Praise God. Thank you.
And also, I have learned history and perspective, and it seems like Israel and God's people just never learn. They just never ever learn.
It's amazing.
And that's what's happening now.
Yeah.
People, we have so many that the seed is thrown upon the rock, or it's thrown in the weeds, and it's and you just see it happen today as well.
Amen.
Daniel, I wonder if I could just ask if you could share, how the book of Isaiah is, it's got a first half and a second half, the first 39 chapters, and then the next 27 chapters. I wonder if you could just share, how do you communicate that to people? And I have a reason for asking, and maybe I can share that quickly.
Yeah, well, hey, I tell you what, maybe since you have a reason, you can share, and then I'll just give you my thoughts. I mean, because I don't know where you're coming from. I know that there is a division there, and I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay.
Well, I'm going to put together a little Bible study about Acts chapter 10, about Peter's vision and going to the household of Cornelius.
Okay.
I'm gonna put a little study together on that, and I've been reading it, and it has the same division. The first 39 verses, and starting with verse 40 in the next 27 verses, that whole story is 66 verses, and it's the same division, starting with verse 40. And so I was just wondering how you would share Isaiah's division.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have gone there because I'd never seen that before. But yeah, It seems to me, because I shared this the first time we were together in Isaiah, the first 39 chapters are kind of like the Old Testament, where there's 39 books in the Old Testament, and then there's 27 chapters dealing with Christ in the book of Isaiah, which is like the 27 chapters in the New Testament. So in the book of Isaiah, you have 4 kings. You have Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and I don't remember the next one. But you have those 4 kings that are taking up the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, which are like the Old Testament. And then you have the prophecies of Christ in chapter 40 and onward, dealing with, through the next 27 chapters, dealing with, like I said, the prophecies of Christ, kind of like the New Testament. So that's how I would separate it, but I like what you're saying with Acts chapter 10 as well. That's interesting.
Okay, well, that's thank you. That helps me because I thought I would make a reference to that, and there's a distinction in that story with Peter, and it seems to be just like it is in the book of Isaiah.
Good, interesting. Thanks for sharing.
I don't know if it's me or what, but whenever numbers come up, like, like talk about numbers today, I think of numerology. The same thing that this one guy, he was showing, if you fold a dollar bill, a $5 bill, $10 bill, a $20 bill, a $50 bill, and a $100 bill in the shape of an airplane, you can see the progression of the 2 towers being burnt down. To me, that's numerology. And whenever I hear something like this, isn't a coincidence that this number here reflects to this number here and stuff like that. Again, I have a fear of numerology, and I don't know where to apply. Is it something I should be concerned about, or is it something that I shouldn't be concerned about?
I've never taken seriously what some would call numerology. I know that you can do all kinds of tricks with Hebrew in the book of Genesis, and you go, so many, you can skip so many words or so many Hebrew letters to find a bunch of stuff. I've never taken that seriously. So I don't really go far into it, but what I have seen is 39 and 27 is like, oh, that's a coincidence. I put that aside as though it might mean something. I don't ever look into it and say, ooh, this has to be, it's spiritual, and it must be symbolic of something. So I don't really go too far into it, but so I don't mean to frighten you at all. Ed, you had your hand up?
Page 452.
Let me read it. Isaiah 8:19 through 20. If men had been willing to receive the truth so plainly stated in the scriptures concerning the nature of man and the state of the dead, they would see in the claims and manifestations of spiritualism the working of Satan with power and signs and lying wonders. But rather than yield the liberty so agreeable to the carnal heart and renounce the sins which they love, multitudes close their eyes and to the light and walk straight on, regardless of warnings, while Satan weaves his snares about them, and they become his prey, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Therefore God shall send them strong delusion, and they should believe a lie. Thank you.
Also, 4 BC 1142.2 talks about fallen man and fallen angels in the same confederacy.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yes.
That's a whole nother side, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about confederacy in the Bible,
Yeah.
when you were talking about in Isaiah 8. And this one says, through apostasy, fallen men and fallen angels are in the same confederacy. They too work against good. They are united in a desperate companionship. Through his evil angels, Satan contrives to form an alliance with prophetically pious men, and thus he leavens the church of God. He knows that if he can induce men, he is induced the angels to join in rebellion under the guise of servants of God. He will have in them his most successful allies in his enterprise against heaven under the name of godliness. He can inspire them with the own accusing spirit, lead them to charge God's servants with evil and guile. They are his trained detectives Their work is to create feuds, to make charges which create discord and bitterness among brethren, to set tongues in active service for Satan, to sow seeds of dissension by watching for evil and by speaking of that which will create discord.
I found something in this Bible I got, Academy Bible, and it says, "What is confederacy?" Is from manuscript 29, 1911. The question has been asked, what do you mean by a confederacy? Who has formed confederacies? You know what a confederacy is? It's a union of men to work that does not bear the stamp of pure, straightforward, unswerving integrity.
Yeah. Sounds like the Ephraim and Syrian connection.